Would you describe yourself as being an optimist? Someone who always sees the bright side of life? Or maybe you'd take pride in being the realist, the one person who sees and faces the facts of reality. Well, if you answered yes to either of these questions, there's reason for concern. The truth is, being either an optimist or a realist is a guaranteed path to leadership disaster. In his book, Good to Great, author Jim Collins explains why, specifically through his research with Admiral James Stockdale. You see, Stockdale spent 8 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, enduring relentless psychological abuse, neglect, and torture. But he survived, and he went on to thrive, becoming the first 3-star officer in the history of the Navy. When Collins interviewed Stockdale, he asked him what was his secret to success. How was he able to have resilience when so many of his fellow soldiers didn't make it out alive? Stockdale started by saying this: "I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted that I'd get out, but also that I'd prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which in retrospect, I wouldn't trade." Hearing this, Collins assumed that the secret to leadership success was optimism. You just needed to be an eternal optimist. But Stockdale quickly corrected him. He went on to explain, there were some people who said, "We're gonna be out of here by Christmas." And then Christmas would come and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, "We're gonna be out of here by Easter." And then Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving. And then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. You must never confuse faith that you'll prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with a discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. Let me be clear, we all need optimism. It keeps morale high, it builds resiliency in tough times, and it allows you to see the opportunities that others miss. But here's what happens when you over-focus on optimism to the neglect of realism. You become blind to the facts of reality that are impacting you. Your team members start to lose trust in your competence, and your naive approach leads to bad decisions. That's why as a leader, you have to embrace realism. You need a clear-eyed view of the challenges that you're facing. This leads to sound, sometimes hard decisions, and you need to be prepared for the obstacle or challenge that's right around the corner. But here's what happens when you over-focus on realism and start to neglect optimism. You create a doom and gloom culture. You miss out on opportunities because of the need for being safe and secure and prepared. And you can get lost in the details and become overwhelmed. Optimism and realism only work well when they're working together. How effective are you at being both an optimist and a realist? I bet if you reflect on the past few weeks, you'll find yourself in one of these 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 is a place you don't want to spend too much time in because you've got low optimism, low realism. We call that being naive and negative. Quadrant 2, you've got lots of optimism. You're looking at the bright side of things. You've got low realism though. We call this unshaken and unprepared. The opposite of that is quadrant 3, where you've got lots of realism. You're facing the facts of reality, but the optimism side's pretty low. We call this driven, but feeling depressed. Well, ultimately, we'll want to spend more and more time in quadrant 4. This is when we haven't met in the middle. Instead, we've got high levels of both. Quadrant 4 is high optimism, high realism, being vigilant and visionary. Regardless of what quadrant you're currently in, the goal is to spend more time in quadrant 4, to be vigilant and visionary. Remember, finding healthy tension between optimism and realism doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. And when you choose to be both an optimist and a realist, the effectiveness and impact of your leadership will be elevated to a whole new level.